The trap of being needed. There is a kind of exhaustion people rarely recognize in time. It does not begin with a breakdown. It does not begin with a dramatic betrayal. It does not begin with one obvious moment where everything falls apart. It begins much earlier. It begins when a person learns that in order to keep a place in other people's lives, they must become useful. They must help. They must understand. They must adjust. They must answer. They must be available. They must make things easier. They must not need too much. And the most dangerous part is this. For a long time, that does not feel like a prison. It feels like goodness. It feels like maturity. It feels like being the kind of person others can trust. Because people rarely applaud you for protecting yourself. But many people will applaud you when you abandon yourself politely. They will tell you that you are kind, that you are reliable, that you are different, that there are not many people like you anymore, that they do not know what they would do without you. And of course, that feels good. It feels like love. It feels like recognition. It feels like proof that you matter. But listen closely. Sometimes what you call kindness is actually fear with good manners. Fear that someone will be disappointed in you. Fear that they will stop looking for you. Fear that they will think you have changed. Fear that if you stop being useful, they will no longer know where to place you in their life. And that is the part almost nobody wants to admit. Because it is easier to say, I am just a good person, than to say, maybe I learned to earn my place by being needed. That sentence hurts more, but it also opens a door, because the real problem may not be that you are too kind. The real problem may be that you built your identity around being the person who does not fail, does not bother, does not ask too much, does not create tension, does not say no too clearly, and does not walk away even when something inside has already become tired. And when you build your life that way, something strange starts to happen. Everybody trusts you, but not everybody checks if you are tired. Everybody knows you will answer, but not everybody asks whether you should have to answer. Everybody knows you can handle things, but very few people ask what it costs you to keep handling them. And slowly, a question begins to form inside you. A question you may not say out loud. Do they love me or do they just need me? That question does not appear by accident. It appears when your presence has become functional. It appears when people know your patience better than they know your pain. It appears when they know your usefulness better than they know your inner life. They know you can listen. They know you can fix things. They know you can stay calm. They know you can forgive. They know you can say, it's fine. But do they know you? Not the useful version. Not the strong version. Not the version that keeps everything running. You. That is where the discomfort begins, because there are people who have spent years being indispensable so they would not feel replaceable. The child who did not cause problems. The friend who was always available. The partner who always understood. The worker who always took on more. The person who could be counted on no matter what. From the outside, it looks admirable. From the inside, it can become devastating. Because when your identity is built around not disappointing people, your own life stops asking what you want. It only asks what is missing. Who needs something? Who is upset? What has to be fixed? What should you say so the tension goes away? What can you do so everything keeps working? And you keep working. That is the dangerous part. You keep functioning. You function while tired. You function while anxious. You function while angry. You function while quietly disappointed. You function while carrying a kind of emotional debt nobody else can see. And because you keep functioning, people assume you are fine. This is one of the cruelest truths of everyday life. Many people will not believe your pain as long as you keep performing strength. If you keep answering, they assume you can answer. If you keep showing up, they assume you are able. If you keep saying, don't worry, they may actually stop worrying. If you keep making it look easy, they may never understand the cost. Not because every person around you is evil, but because human beings adapt to what is repeatedly available. If your time is always available, your time stops looking scarce. If your forgiveness has no consequence, your forgiveness becomes cheap. If your help arrives before anyone has to feel discomfort, people stop learning how to carry their own discomfort. If you keep fixing what you did not break, you may end up surrounded by people who break things without looking. Again, not always because they are cruel. Sometimes because the system has taught them that with you, there is no real cost. And that is a hard thing to hear, because it means the issue is not only what others do to you, it is also what you have trained the world to expect from you. That does not mean you are guilty of everything. It means you are not powerless, and for someone who has felt used, that distinction matters. Guilt says, something is wrong with me. Responsibility says, something in this pattern can be changed. Guilt freezes you. Responsibility gives you movement, and if you have spent years abandoning yourself, you do not need more self-hatred. You need movement. Small movement. Real movement. Repeated movement. Not a dramatic speech. Not a complete personality change. Not an angry announcement that you are done with everyone. Sometimes the first movement is much quieter. You do not answer immediately. You do not offer before being asked. You let someone solve their own problem. You say, I need to think about it. You say, I can help with this part, but not with everything. You say, no, I cannot do that today. And then comes the hardest part. You do not rush to repair the discomfort your boundary created. Because the real challenge is not saying no. The real challenge is surviving what happens inside you after you say no. The guilt, the tension, the silence, the fear that they now see you differently. The temptation to explain yourself until your boundary no longer exists. That is where the old pattern fights back. Many people know how to say no once. They do not know how to stand inside the emotional weather that comes after it. So they say no, but then explain too much. They say no, but offer 5 alternatives. They say no, but apologize as if they committed a crime. They say no, but spend the rest of the day feeling like a terrible person. They say no, but then turn it into a yes with different wording. And then the boundary does not free them. It only creates a new kind of anxiety. That is why this cannot be solved with the simple advice. Just learn to say no. That advice is not wrong. It is just incomplete, because underneath the inability to say no, there is often a deeper fear. The fear that your value will collapse if you stop being convenient. The fear that love will be withdrawn if you stop being easy. The fear that your place in someone's life was never really about who you are, but about what you provide. That is the wound, not just exhaustion. The fear of losing value when you stop serving. And when that fear is not examined, a person can spend years confusing love with dependency, respect with habit, and recognition with elegant exploitation. Because not all exploitation looks cruel. Sometimes people use you with warmth. They thank you. They praise you. They call you special. They tell you they are grateful. They give you just enough affection to keep you emotionally invested. And that is much harder to detect. If someone uses you with obvious cruelty, your dignity may eventually wake up. But if someone uses you with tenderness, you can stay trapped for years. Because every time something feels wrong, you explain it away. They do care about me. They are just going through a lot. They did not mean it. They need me. I can handle a little more. If I do not do it, who will? And that last question is dangerous. If I do not do it, who will? It sounds responsible. But sometimes it is sacrifice mixed with control. Yes, control. Control over whether people get upset. Control over whether the atmosphere becomes tense. Control over whether someone suffers. Control over whether your image as the good one stays intact. Control over whether anyone gets the chance to see you as difficult. And like every form of control, it exhausts you. Because you cannot manage everyone else's comfort without losing your own peace. You cannot be the emotional regulator of every room. You cannot become the emergency system for every relationship. You cannot spend your life putting out fires other people keep creating while your own house fills with smoke. But many people do exactly that. They call it love. They call it loyalty. They call it being there for others. And sometimes it is love. Sometimes it is loyalty. Sometimes it is care. But sometimes, beneath all of that, there is a fear nobody has named. What if they only keep me around because I am useful? That question can change everything. Because real kindness has freedom. People-pleasing does not. Real kindness can say yes from peace. People-pleasing says yes from fear. Real kindness helps and then rests. People-pleasing helps and then secretly waits to be noticed. Real kindness gives without turning the gift into an invoice. People-pleasing gives and stores every sacrifice in a hidden account. And that hidden account is dangerous, because if you give without speaking your needs, but secretly expect the other person to understand everything you never said, resentment will eventually grow. You will feel betrayed by expectations that were never clearly expressed. This happens constantly. A person gives and gives and gives, but does not ask. They do not ask because asking feels embarrassing. They do not ask because they fear looking needy. They do not ask because they believe that if someone truly cares, they should just know. And so they build an invisible debt. After everything I have done, they should understand. But maybe the other person does not understand. Maybe they do not want to understand. Maybe it benefits them not to understand. Maybe they got so used to receiving that they stopped seeing the giving. And meanwhile, the person who gave too much becomes bitter, not only because others failed them, but because they never learned to tell the truth before becoming resentful. This is not to excuse other people. It is to bring you back to your own power. Nobody can respect a boundary that never existed. Nobody can protect a need you keep hiding to appear strong. Nobody can reciprocate a sacrifice you present as if it costs you nothing. And if you want a more honest life, you must stop acting as if nothing hurts when something does hurt. You must stop saying it's fine when it is not fine. You must stop presenting yourself as endlessly capable when you are not endlessly capable. You must stop calling it peace when only one person is paying the cost of avoiding conflict. Because that is not peace. That is managed silence. And managed silence always collects payment. It collects payment in the body, in sleep, in anxiety, in resentment, in creativity, in desire, in ambition, in the quiet disappearance of joy. A life of pleasing others does not only take your time, it takes your life force. It turns you into a person who still functions, but no longer fully feels alive. And because you still function, people may think everything is okay. You still answer. You still show up. You still smile. You still deliver. You still say the right thing. But inside, something begins to leave. Something leaves every time you say yes when your whole body means no. Something leaves every time you stay silent to keep the room comfortable. Something leaves every time you accept less than you need because you do not want to seem demanding. Something leaves every time someone crosses a line and you simply move the line farther away. Until one day you no longer know where you are. You only know where you are needed. And that is the center of the problem. The overly good person does not always lose because life is unfair. Sometimes they lose because they learned to locate themselves inside other people's needs before locating themselves inside their own life. They know what everyone else needs, but not what they need. They know how to speak so others do not get upset, but not how to speak from their own truth. They can detect a change in someone's tone, but ignore their own internal warning signs. They can hold difficult emotions for others, but avoid the most difficult conversation of all. What life am I building by continuing to be needed? That question is painful because it does not accuse anyone else. It brings you face to face with yourself, and maybe that is why we avoid it. It is easier to say, people take advantage of me, than to say, I have also been afraid to stop being available to be taken advantage of. It is easier to say, nobody values me, than to say, I taught people that my value came without conditions. It is easier to say, it always falls on me, than to say, sometimes I ran toward that role because I did not know who I was without it. This is not about punishing yourself. It is about waking up, because responsibility, when handled correctly, is not a weapon against you. It is a door, and the door opens with a simple but uncomfortable realization. You can remain a good person without remaining an unlimited resource. You can care without being consumed. You can love without becoming someone's emotional property. You can help without turning yourself into the floor everyone walks on. You can be generous without being available for everything. And if some people only liked the version of you that had no limits, then your limits are not destroying the relationship. They are revealing it. That is a painful distinction. Sometimes a boundary does not ruin the connection. It exposes what the connection was made of. If there was respect, there may be discomfort, but also adjustment. If there was love, there may be surprise, but also conversation. If there was real care, the other person may not like the limit, but they will try to understand it. But if the relationship was built on your lack of boundaries, the reaction may be very different. Guilt, pressure, coldness, mockery, victimhood, silent punishment, a sudden accusation that you have changed. And maybe you have changed, but not every change is betrayal. Sometimes change is recovery. Sometimes becoming not the same as before means you are no longer the most exhausted version of yourself. The version that said yes out of fear. The version that swallowed anger. The version that confused love with endurance. The version that needed to be needed in order to feel safe. That version deserves compassion, not hatred, because that version helped you survive. It helped you avoid conflict. It helped you receive approval. It helped you belong. It helped you feel useful. It helped you keep certain relationships alive. But not everything that helped you survive should be allowed to govern your adult life. Some strategies save you in one season and imprison you in another. Being pleasing may have protected you in a place where your anger was not welcome. Being useful may have brought you recognition when you did not know how to ask for affection. Being quiet may have kept you safe when speaking created punishment. Being adaptable may have helped you move through difficult environments. But if you keep using the same strategy after the environment has changed, you start paying a price you no longer need to pay. It is like walking with crutches long after your leg can carry weight. At first, the crutches helped. Later, they limit you. And if you keep depending on them, your own strength never fully returns. Personality can work the same way. A behavior begins as protection. Then it becomes identity. Then it becomes destiny. But it does not have to remain destiny. You can thank that old version of yourself without obeying it forever. You can say, "Thank you for helping me survive. But now I need to live differently." That is not self-betrayal. That is self-update. And it matters, because many people try to change by insulting themselves. They say, "I was stupid. I let everyone use me. I have no character. I am weak. I always do this." But that only deepens the wound. You do not need cruelty to wake up. You need precision. Precision says, "Yes, I allowed things that hurt me. Yes, I was afraid to disappoint people. Yes, I offered too much. Yes, I called fear kindness. Yes, I expected others to guess what I never clearly said. Yes, I participated in patterns I now need to change. That hurts, but it is clean. Because it does not destroy you. It locates you. And once you are located, you can move. Not by becoming cold. Not by becoming hard. Not by becoming someone who no longer cares. But by becoming clear. Clarity is different from hardness. Hardness builds walls. Clarity builds doors. Hardness says, "No one gets in." Clarity says, "You may come in, but not by stepping over me." Hardness is often fear wearing armor. Clarity is self-respect with a calm voice. And a clear person can still be warm. They can still listen. They can still care. They can still love deeply. They can still help. But they no longer hand over the keys to their life as proof of their goodness. And when a person stops handing over the keys to their life, something shifts quietly. It may not look dramatic from the outside. There may be no fight, no final conversation, no scene where everything changes at once, no moment that looks powerful enough to be remembered. Sometimes the change begins in the smallest place, the way you read a message. Before, a request would make your whole body react. Answer. Fix it. Do not take too long. Do not be difficult. Do not make them uncomfortable. Do not give them a reason to pull away. Now, you pause, not because you do not care, but because you no longer want to answer from the reflex of saving everything. Before, an unexpected call felt like an obligation. Now it can simply be a call. Before, someone's serious face could make you abandon your own position. Now it can simply be a serious face. Before, silence from another person could make you run to repair something you were not even sure you had broken. Now you can let silence exist without turning it into an emergency. That is emotional maturity, not the absence of feeling, but the ability to stop obeying every internal alarm as if it were truth. Because the overly good person often lives with alarms that are too sensitive. They detect tension early. They read faces. They analyze tones. They anticipate disappointment. They prepare explanations before anyone asks for them. They adjust themselves before the room even demands it. And all of that can look like empathy. But sometimes it is vigilance. And living in constant vigilance to prevent conflict is a form of emotional captivity. Nobody sees it, but it drains you. It drains you to monitor the room, to measure your words, to hide your irritation, to ask yourself whether you said too much, to feel as if your peace depends on nobody changing their tone. And this has to be said carefully. Not every alarm inside you is telling the truth. Some alarms do not come from the present. They come from older stories, from times when someone's anger really did become punishment, from places where asking for something really did create guilt, from relationships where your needs were treated like a burden, from environments where being easy was safer than being honest. So when someone is disappointed today, your body may react as if you are in danger. Even if you are not, even if you are only setting a normal boundary, even if you are simply saying no, even if you are no longer accepting something that never should have been placed on you. This is why change is so difficult. You are not fighting only an idea. You are working against an emotional memory, a body memory, a relational memory, a pattern that once connected approval with safety. So if you set a boundary and then feel guilty, that does not automatically mean the boundary was wrong. It may only mean your body is learning to live without pleasing. It may mean your guilt is not a moral compass. It may be withdrawal from an old pattern, and this matters. Not every feeling of guilt means you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt only means you have done something new, something that breaks an old obedience, something your system does not yet recognize as safe. That is why you should be careful about making decisions while guilt is loud. Guilt wants you to repair. It wants you to send another message. It wants you to soften the sentence. It wants you to explain. It wants you to step back. It wants you to say, "I'm sorry, maybe I overreacted." But sometimes you did not overreact. Sometimes you finally reacted. And because you rarely did before, the reaction now feels excessive. The voice of people-pleasing will always try to convince you that your boundary was too much, even if it was small, even if it was respectful, even if it was fair, even if you said it with a shaking voice, because the old version of you does not want to lose its safety system. It wants to return to what is familiar. It wants the false peace. It wants approval back. It wants to be needed again. It wants to be liked by everyone. But a life built around being liked by everyone eventually becomes unlivable for the person living it. That is the paradox. Everyone may feel comfortable with you, except you. Everyone may say you are wonderful, except you because you know what it costs. Everyone may admire your patience, except you, because inside you are no longer sure whether you are giving from love or from fear. And if a life receives applause on the outside but feels like self-abandonment on the inside, something is wrong. Not necessarily with every person around you, but with the agreement, with the role, with the silent contract, with the way you learned to secure your place. And the way out is not to hate everyone who benefited from it. The way out is to stop performing the agreement, without drama, without endless speeches, without needing everybody to understand immediately. Just by no longer acting as if your sacrifice is automatic. Because when a person truly changes, they do not always need to announce the change. They begin to live differently, and eventually people notice. They notice you no longer answer the same way. They notice you no longer offer so quickly. They notice you no longer accept jokes that are really disrespect with a smile. They notice you no longer treat every invented urgency as a command. They notice you no longer turn every person's conflict into your private project. They notice you no longer apologize for having needs. At first, even you may feel strange. You may feel less kind, less special, less loved, because you are losing a source of identity. Before you knew who you were, the good one, the available one, the understanding one, the one who did not fail, the one who could handle everything. the one who stayed. Now you have to discover something more complicated. How to be good without being used. How to be sensitive without being absorbed. How to be generous without being exploited. How to be reliable without being available for everything. How to be strong without becoming everyone's container. That balance is much harder than people-pleasing. People-pleasing, although painful, is simple. Someone needs, you give. Someone is upset, you repair. Someone asks, you adjust. Someone is silent, you worry. Someone pulls away, you chase. Someone fails, you understand. Someone returns, you open the door. It is a familiar script. Painful, but familiar. Maturity is harder. Maturity requires discernment. It asks, is this love or fear? Is this help or rescue? Is this patience or self-abandonment? Is this loyalty or dependency? Is this understanding or a lack of dignity? Is this generosity or a need for approval? Those questions do not always give comfortable answers, but they give you something you may have lost. Judgment. The overly good person often does not lack kindness. They lack judgment about where to place it. They give deeply in places where nothing comes back. They are patient with people who use patience as permission. They are understanding with people who have no real intention of changing. They are loyal to dynamics that are no longer alive. They are consistent where they should have become selective. And that word matters. Selective. Not everything deserves your most devoted version. Not everything deserves your cleanest time. Not everything deserves your deepest listening. Not everything deserves your most noble energy. Not because you are better than others, but because your energy is limited. Your time is limited. Your body is limited. Your emotional capacity is limited. Your life is limited. And what is limited must be protected. That is not selfishness. That is life management. A person who does not manage their life eventually becomes managed by other people's needs. And this happens every day. People whose schedule was never chosen by them. It was chosen by other people's emergencies. People whose priorities were not really theirs. They were assigned by whoever asked faster, cried louder, demanded more, or manipulated better. People whose relationships were not chosen from freedom. They simply stayed wherever they felt needed. People whose future was never built. They just kept solving the present for everyone else. And then, years later, they wake up with a bitter question. When did my life become this? It did not happen in one day. It happened in hundreds of small yeses you did not want to give. It happened in messages you did not want to answer. It happened in explanations you did not owe. It happened in forgiveness without change. It happened in responsibilities you accepted to avoid conflict. It happened in emotional labor nobody recognized. It happened while you were holding other people's lives together while your own waited in the background. That is why this topic is so serious. We are not only talking about personality. We are talking about destiny, because what you tolerate repeatedly begins to organize your life. What you accept repeatedly becomes normal. What you silence repeatedly becomes structure. And one day, you are no longer making decisions. You are living inside the decisions you avoided. That sentence may hurt, but it can also wake something up. Because if your life was organized around avoiding discomfort, your freedom begins exactly where you accept discomfort. There is no other door. There is no way to reclaim your life without disappointing someone. There is no way to set boundaries without someone losing convenience. There is no way to choose yourself without someone noticing that you are less useful to their plans. There is no way to become whole while remaining convenient for everyone. And that is okay. Not everyone has to feel comfortable with your growth. In fact, if everybody feels comfortable with your change, maybe the change was not that deep. Real change redistributes power. It redistributes access. It redistributes expectations. It redistributes responsibility. Before, you carried it. Now someone else must carry their part. Before, you absorbed it. Now someone else must face the consequence. Before, you adjusted. Now there must be real negotiation. Before, you stayed quiet. Now there will be truth. And truth does not always enter softly into systems built on your silence. But without truth, there is no healthy connection, only performance. And many overly good people have been excellent performers. They perform calm. They perform understanding. They perform strength. They perform availability. They perform everything is fine. While inside, they are full of conversations they never allowed themselves to have. Those inner conversations become a noisy room. I should have said something. I should not have accepted that. Why do I always do this? I do not want this anymore. But if I say something, they will get upset. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it is not that serious. Maybe it is me. That phrase, maybe it is me, has kept too many people trapped. Because yes, sometimes it is you, but not in the way shame says. It is you in the sense that you are participating in a pattern you now need to stop feeding. That is different. You are not responsible for every way people have hurt you, but you are responsible for examining what you keep allowing now that you can see it. That is the adult line. Before you saw it, you were inside a pattern. After you see it, you have a new responsibility. Uncomfortable, but real. And this is where some people resist this kind of message, because they prefer an explanation where the entire problem lives outside them. They are selfish. They do not value me. They take advantage. They never change. They do not understand. And sometimes that is true. But if all the power is outside you, then all you can do is wait. Wait for them to understand. Wait for them to mature. Wait for them to value you. Wait for them to apologize. Wait for them to finally see everything you carried. And waiting can become another form of self-abandonment. Some people are not living. They are waiting for someone else to have a moral awakening. They wait for a boss to notice. They wait for a partner to understand. They wait for family to become fair. They wait for friends to reciprocate. They wait for someone to say, "Now I see everything you did." But maybe that scene never comes. And even if it does, maybe it comes too late. So here is a question that cuts through the illusion. What will you do if they never give you the recognition you are waiting for? Not what will you feel. You already know what you will feel. It will hurt. The question is what you will do. Will you keep giving to see if this time they finally understand? Will you keep collecting evidence of your sacrifice? Will you keep living as if love were a trial where you must present proof? Or will you start building a life where your worth no longer depends on someone finally admitting they owed you something? That question changes everything, because it moves you out of endless complaint. Not because the complaint is false, but because living inside the complaint keeps you attached to the same place. Freedom begins when you stop organizing your life around a repair that may never arrive. And that does not mean everything is forgiven. It does not mean what happened was okay. It does not mean you pretend it did not matter. It means something stronger. You will no longer pay with more life for a debt other people refuse to recognize, because some emotional debts are never paid. And if you keep waiting for payment, you keep paying. With time, with attention, with mental energy, with imaginary conversations, with rehearsed speeches, with the hope that one day they will understand exactly how much it hurt. But your pain does not need approval to be real. You do not need someone to admit they hurt you before you begin protecting yourself. You do not need someone to agree that they used your availability before you stop being available in that way. You do not need someone to validate your exhaustion before you rest. You do not need permission from the debtor to stop lending. That sentence is a door. You do not need permission from the debtor to stop lending. And in many relationships, that is exactly what is happening. You keep lending time to someone who does not return presents. You keep lending attention to someone who does not listen. You keep lending patience to someone who does not change. You keep lending understanding to someone who uses your understanding to repeat the same behavior. You keep lending access to someone who never respected the door. And every new loan increases the debt, but it does not increase the chance of repayment. It only increases your exhaustion. So sometimes the healthiest act is not to collect. It is to stop lending. Stop lending your peace. Stop lending your body. Stop lending your hours. Stop lending your availability. Stop lending your guilt as a tool for other people to organize their lives. And when you do that, the relationship enters truth. If something real was there, it may find a more balanced form. If only convenience was there, it may begin to fall apart. And allowing something to fall apart when it was held together by your self-abandonment is also a form of healing. It hurts, but it cleans, because not everything you lose was love. Sometimes you lose a habit. Sometimes you lose a dependency. Sometimes you lose an image. Sometimes you lose a cage decorated with kind words. And yes, that is frightening. because the cage also gave identity. But a cage that gives you identity is still a cage. This is where you need to be careful. When you begin leaving the role of the overly good person, you may feel tempted to create another role. The role of the person who allows nothing, the cold person, the person who proudly says they do not care anymore, the person who turns every conversation into me first, the person who uses the word boundaries to avoid emotional responsibility. That is not freedom either. That is another mask, maybe stronger, maybe more defended, but still a mask. The goal is not to move from martyr to stone. The goal is to move from reaction to choice. Choosing when to give, choosing how much to give, choosing whom to give to, choosing from where you give, choosing when to step back, choosing when to speak, choosing when to release, choosing when a relationship deserves work and when it only wants continued access to your patience. Choice is the center, because when you choose, your kindness regains dignity. It is no longer an automatic reflex. It is no longer an emotional tax. It is no longer a currency for buying affection. It is no longer a strategy for preventing abandonment. It becomes an expression of who you are. And then kindness becomes cleaner, less anxious, less resentful, less performative, more true. People think boundaries reduce love. Many times, they purify it. They remove obligation. They remove manipulation. They remove infinite expectation. They remove silent debts. They remove the fear of losing your place. What remains may be smaller, but it is more real. And a smaller connection built on truth is worth more than a huge connection sustained by your disappearance. Some people prefer a life full of relationships, even if almost none of those relationships truly see them. They prefer being surrounded, being needed, being contacted, being the support point. But if they feel lonely inside all of that, then the amount of contact solved nothing. Because you can be needed by many and still feel accompanied by no one. You can have a phone full of messages and still feel that nobody asks about you. You can receive gratitude and still not feel intimacy. You can be important to how other people function, but not to how they care. That is a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of always being there for others, while wondering whether anyone would be there for you in the same way. And that loneliness is not solved by giving more. It is solved by no longer confusing need with connection. Because someone needing you does not mean they know you. Someone looking for you does not mean they value you. Someone depending on you does not mean they love you well. Someone saying, "I do not know what I would do without you," is not always the romantic sentence it seems to be. Sometimes it is a burden. "I do not know what I would do without you" can also mean, "I have not developed resources because you are always there. I do not have to take responsibility because you appear. I do not have to look at my life because you help me avoid it. I may not know how to care for you, but I know how to need you." And being needed in that way is not a prize. It is a trap, because if someone does not know what to do without you, the connection may not be based on freedom. It may be based on dependency, and dependency can feel intense. It can look like love. It can feel like destiny. It can seem deep, but many times, it is shared fear. One person fears losing support, the other fears losing a role. And two fears can hold each other for years and call it love, until one person begins to wake up. Then the conflict begins. Because waking up does not always feel beautiful. Sometimes it feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the role. Betrayal of the history. Betrayal of the version of you everyone knew. Betrayal of expectations. But maybe it is not betrayal. Maybe it is delayed loyalty to yourself. A loyalty that took years to arrive. And when it arrives, it may not always speak gently. Sometimes it arrives with exhaustion. Sometimes with anger. Sometimes with tears. Sometimes with one dry sentence. "I do not want to keep living this way." That sentence can be the beginning of a different life. Not a perfect life. Not a life without guilt. Not a life without loss. But a more honest life. Because life does not become better only because you learn to say no. Life becomes better when you no longer need your yes to be proof that you deserve love. That is the deeper shift. When you can say yes because you want to, not because you are afraid. When you can say no without feeling that your value collapses. When you can help without becoming the savior. When you can love without disappearing. When you can be good without using your goodness as protection against abandonment. That is maturity, and it does not happen in one day. It is practiced. It is practiced in every decision where you used to betray yourself. It is practiced when someone asks for something and you do not answer from urgency. It is practiced when someone is disappointed and you do not rush to buy approval. It is practiced when someone calls you selfish and you examine yourself honestly, but you do not automatically collapse. It is practiced when a relationship becomes tense and you choose truth instead of performance. It is practiced when you can say, "This matters to me, but I matter too." That sentence should live somewhere inside you. This matters to me, but I matter too. Because the overly good person often lives as if those two things cannot exist together. Either you matter or I matter. Either I protect the relationship or I protect myself. Either I am kind or I have boundaries. Either I love or I choose myself. But adult life requires bringing back together what the wound separated. I can love you and not obey you. I can care about you and not carry you. I can listen to you and not absorb you. I can walk beside you and not disappear. I can disappoint you and still be a decent person. I can say no and still have a heart. That integration is freedom, not the false freedom of, "I do not need anyone." That is often pain-speaking. Real freedom says, "I do need connection, but I will no longer buy it with my disappearance." That is different, because this is not about denying human need. Everybody needs. We need affection. We need belonging. We need recognition. We need support. We need to feel that we matter. The problem is not needing. The problem is turning need into servitude. The problem is believing that, in order to receive love, you must become less yourself, more useful, more convenient, more available, more silent, more adaptable, easier to keep around. No, a person who only wants you when you are convenient does not love you deeply. They prefer you functional. There is a difference. And maybe one of the most important decisions in life is to stop searching for love in places where they only offer you a function. Because if you stay there too long, you begin to believe that function is all there is. You begin to think love means exhaustion. You begin to think belonging means surrender. You begin to think value means solving. You begin to think goodness means not taking up space. You begin to think having a place means becoming indispensable. But there is another way. Slower, less familiar, more uncomfortable at first, but freer. A way to be in other people's lives without becoming a tool. A way to give without becoming empty. A way to listen without becoming an emotional trash bin. A way to love without losing your voice. A way to help without secretly hoping your help will purchase permanence. Because that is another truth almost nobody wants to touch. Sometimes we give because we are trying to buy permanence. We do not say it that way, but we feel it. If I am always there, they will not leave. If I support them enough, they will choose me. If I never fail, I will not be replaced. If I give everything, they will finally understand my value. And that hope can become cruel, because it makes you compete against an impossible task. Be so useful that nobody wants to leave. But people can leave even if you were useful. They can leave even if you were good. They can leave even if you gave a lot. They can leave even if you stayed. They can leave even if you understood. And if your strategy for not losing people was to give more, every loss will feel like a verdict against your worth. Was I not enough? Maybe you were enough, but you were trying to buy, through sacrifice, something that can only exist through freedom. Love is not guaranteed by usefulness. Loyalty is not guaranteed by sacrifice. Permanence is not guaranteed by availability. And although that hurts, it also brings rest, because it means you do not have to destroy yourself trying to control who stays. Your task is not to become indispensable. Your task is to become true. And allow whoever can connect with that truth to stay. Not with your mask, not with your service, not with your excess, not with your fear, with your truth. And this changes even the way you speak. Before, maybe your language sounded like this. Whatever you need. It's okay. I'll adjust. Don't worry about me. I'll figure it out. It does not matter. I can handle it. Simple phrases. Kind phrases, but many times they were spoken from self-abandonment. Now you can learn a different language, not aggressive, not cold, clear. Let me check first. I cannot do that today. That is not mine to take on. I can help with one part. I need to rest. I do not want to do it that way. This does affect me. If this happens again, I will take distance. I can listen, but I will not solve it for you. I want to be here, but not at the cost of myself. At first, this language may feel strange, like new clothing, like a voice that is not fully yours yet, but it becomes yours through use. Identity is trained, not only the body, not only the mind. The way you present yourself to life is also trained. If you trained availability for years, now you must train presence with limits. If you trained silence, now you must train truth. If you trained guilt, now you must train tolerance for discomfort. If you trained rescue, now you must train trust that others can carry their own part. If you trained self-abandonment, now you must train return. Return to yourself, to your schedule, to your desires, to your priorities, to your body, to your rest, to your judgment, to your healthy anger, to your voice. Because recovery is not only saying no outside, it is listening again inside. And maybe at first you do not even know what you want. That is normal. After years of asking what everyone else needs, asking what you need can feel frightening. There may be silence, confusion, guilt, a strange emptiness. But that emptiness is not failure. It is recovered space. Before, it was filled with other people's demands. Now it is free. And freedom at first can feel terrifying, because you do not know what to put there. But over time, you can put life there. Rest, projects, health, ambition, play, peace, relationships that are more reciprocal, things that do not have to justify their existence by serving someone else. That is when a person truly begins to change, not because they became hard, but because they came back to themselves. And a person who inhabits themselves enters relationships differently. They no longer arrive silently begging to be needed. They arrive more whole, more able to give well, more able to receive, more able to leave if the relationship requires their disappearance, more able to stay if there is truth. And although that may sound less romantic, it is far more loving. Because love between whole people is not based on hunger. It is based on choice, not, I need you so I do not fall apart. But, I choose you without making you responsible for what belongs to me. Of course, we all carry one another sometimes. Of course, love includes support. Of course, there are difficult seasons. Nobody is denying that. But a season of support is not the same as an identity of savior. A specific crisis is not the same as a permanent dynamic. A concrete act of help is not the same as a life organized around sustaining someone who refuses to take responsibility. That difference saves relationships, and it saves people. Because when you help from freedom, you can help with love. When you help from obligation, eventually you will charge the debt through resentment. Maybe not with words, but with distance, with coldness, with exhaustion, with the desire to disappear. And if you want to avoid that ending, you need honesty earlier. Honesty to say, yes, I want to help, but not like this. Yes, I care about you, but this is becoming too much for me. Yes, I want to be here, but I need reciprocity. Yes, I can walk with you, but I cannot live your life for you. Yes, I love you, but I also need to care for myself. Those sentences do not destroy healthy bonds. They organize them. And if a bond breaks because you asked for order, maybe what broke was not love. Maybe it was the illusion of love where there had only been access. That kind of loss is necessary. Painful, but necessary. Because you cannot build a healthy life while preserving every unhealthy dynamic. You cannot mature without removing some people's privileges over you. You cannot recover yourself without disturbing those who benefited from your absence from yourself. You cannot return to your life while remaining available for everything. And if this message makes you uncomfortable, maybe it is not because it is harsh. Maybe it is because it names a door you already know you need to cross. A door that does not open through a beautiful quote. It opens through action. Small action, repeated action, sustained action, uncomfortable action, honest action. The next time someone asks something of you, do not answer immediately from guilt. Pause. Ask yourself, do I want to? Can I? Is this mine to carry? What will it cost me? Am I helping or am I buying approval? Does this respect me too? And if the answer is no, practice one clear sentence. Not a long explanation. Not a defense. Not a legal document. One sentence. I cannot today. I would rather not. That is not mine to take on. I can help with this, but not with the rest. I need to think about it. Then comes the most important part. Do not rush to repair the discomfort. Let it exist. Discomfort is not always damage. Sometimes it is only the sound of an old pattern breaking. And when a pattern breaks, something inside you shakes. But that shaking is not always a warning to go back. Sometimes it is the sign of birth. Because a new version of you does not arrive feeling safe on the first day. It arrives trembling. It arrives with guilt. It arrives doubting itself. It arrives wondering if it is being too much. It arrives wanting to return to the old role. But if you keep choosing it, it grows. And one day you realize something. You do not need to explain as much. You do not need everyone to like you. You do not need to be indispensable. You do not need to prove love through automatic sacrifice. You do not need people to call you good in order to know you still have a heart. And then something beautiful happens, even if at first it may look colder. You begin to give less from fear and more from truth. You give less to those who only take. You give more to those who also care. You give better because you are no longer giving from emptiness. You give with presence, with limits, with joy, without that secret invoice you used to carry inside. And then your kindness stops being a trap. It becomes a gift again, a real gift, not a currency, not a plea, not a hidden contract, not a survival strategy, a gift. And gifts are only gifts when the giver remains free. If you cannot say no, your yes is not fully free. If you cannot leave, your staying is not fully free. If you cannot ask, your giving is not fully honest. If you cannot show tiredness, your strength has become performance. And you do not need to keep performing. You need to return. Return to that internal place where you do not have to earn the right to exist every day. Where you can be kind, but not available for everything. Where you can be deep, but not absorb everyone. Where you can be loyal, but not loyal to your own destruction. Where you can be generous, but not careless with your energy. Where you can love, but not disappear. Because the real question is not whether you are a good person. Maybe you are. Maybe you have been for years. Maybe you have given more than many people would have given. Maybe you have carried things nobody saw. Maybe you were patient in moments where others would have left. Maybe your heart really is noble. But the more important question is this. Does your kindness include you? Because if your kindness protects everyone except you, it is incomplete. If your compassion forgives everyone except you, it is incomplete. If your patience waits for everyone except you, it is incomplete. If your love cares for everyone except you, it is incomplete. And maybe the next stage of your life is not about becoming less kind. Maybe it is about no longer excluding yourself from your own kindness. That is all. You do not have to harden until you stop feeling. You do not have to distrust everyone. You do not have to turn every relationship into a cold negotiation. You do not have to walk away from everything. You do not have to prove anything through a dramatic transformation. You only have to begin living as if you are also someone under your care, as if your time also has value, as if your tiredness also deserves respect, as if your limits are also legitimate, as if your desires are allowed to enter the conversation, as if your life is not an emergency reserve for other people's needs, because it is not. Your life is not a waiting room for people to enter when they need something. Your life is not a storage room full of patience. Your life is not an open line 24 hours a day. Your life is not a permanent debt to whoever got used to receiving. Your life is yours. And yes, you can share it. You can love deeply. You can care. You can serve. You can accompany. You can give. You can be generous. But sharing your life is not the same as losing it. And too many people have confused those two things. They called love losing themselves. They called kindness silence. They called maturity endurance. They called loyalty never leaving. They called humility never asking. They called peace not bringing it up. But truth does not disappear because you give it a nicer name. What hurts you hurts you. What exhausts you exhausts you. What overwhelms you overwhelms you. What dims you dims you. And an honest life begins when you stop decorating your own pain so other people can remain comfortable. You do not have to scream it, but you do have to listen to it. Because if you do not listen to your life, others may continue using your silence as permission. Not necessarily because they are evil, but because silence in practice often behaves like consent. It should not always be that way, but it often is. So if something cannot continue, it needs words. If something hurts, it needs a boundary. If something repeats, it needs a consequence. If something drains you, it needs examination. If something requires your disappearance, it needs distance. And if someone cannot receive that without punishing you, you need to know that too. Because part of growing up is no longer protecting relationships from a truth they need to hear. If a relationship only survives because you hide the truth, it is not surviving. It is suspended, and sooner or later, what is suspended falls. Better that it falls through honesty than through accumulated resentment. Better an uncomfortable conversation than years of performance. Better a boundary on time than a late explosion. Better to lose false comfort than to lose yourself completely. And now, we can close the circle. The trap was not being a good person. The trap was believing your goodness had to function as constant proof of your value. The trap was confusing being needed with being loved. The trap was thinking that if you stopped being available, you would stop mattering. The trap was calling it peace when you were the one paying the cost of keeping everyone comfortable. But now you can see it, and once you can see it, you cannot pretend in the same way. Maybe you will still fall back into the pattern. Maybe you will still say yes when you wanted to say no. Maybe you will still explain too much. Maybe you will still feel guilty after choosing yourself. Maybe you will still look for signs of approval. That is okay. A deep pattern does not disappear because you understood it once. But every time you see it, you have an opportunity. An opportunity to pause. An opportunity to breathe. An opportunity to choose differently. An opportunity not to abandon yourself. And maybe that, repeated many times, is exactly what recovery is. Not a grand scene, not a new personality, not a false hardness, but the slow, honest return to yourself, to a version of you that can still love, but no longer needs to disappear to prove it, to a version of you that can still help, but no longer needs to be indispensable to feel valuable, to a version of you that can still be kind, but finally understand something. Kindness that destroys you is not virtue. It is a sign that you also need to enter your own circle of care. And if this kind of truth unsettles you, maybe it did not come to entertain you. Maybe it came to leave you with a question that may follow you for a while, but might also save you. Are you still helping because you want to, or because you are afraid to discover what happens when you stop being needed? Because maybe, just beyond that fear, the thing waiting for you is not the loneliness you imagined. Maybe it is your life, your real life, the one that begins when you stop earning your place by disappearing.